What a day. Welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. I'm Brian Kilmeade, and as far as I can tell, I'll be filling in for Tucker all night long. An explosive hearing, to say the least, just ended on Capitol Hill. Disgraced FBI agent Peter Strzok dueling with lawmakers for hours as they probe him about his handling of the Trump-Russia investigation big time. His text to his then-lover, Lisa Page, and possible bias at the FBI. Congressman Louis Gohmert will join us in a matter of moments. He grilled Strzok on his dishonesty, and he got personal.
When I see you looking there with a little smirk, how many times did you look so innocent into your wife's eye and lie to her about Lisa?
Mr. Chairman, this is outrageous.
It was like a rowdy college dorm at times. Congressman Trey Gowdy ripped into Strzok as well.
I don't appreciate what was originally said being changed.
I don't give a damn what you appreciate, Agent Strzok.
Strzok himself could not avoid grandstanding, saying the entire affair played into the hands of Russia.
I have the utmost respect for Congress's oversight role, but I strongly believe today's hearing is just another victory notch in Putin's belt and another milestone in our enemy's campaign to tear America apart.
But what role did he play in all this? Fox Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live on Capitol Hill. Catherine, 12 hours, 13 hours, 72 lawmakers. What did you glean from it?
Well, in the last couple of hours, we've had some additional headlines, Brian. What I want to point out right now is an interesting exchange, which was about Peter Strzok's removal or termination from the Russia Special Counsel investigation in July of 2017. And we learned that Robert Mueller never asked him specifics about the anti-Trump text messages. Here's that exchange.
I want to know if Bob Mueller asked you about this text message.
Director Mueller did not ask me about any text message, Congressman.
Well, gosh, just days after Mueller is appointed, in two text messages, one on the 19th of May and one on the 22nd of May, you reference impeachment. Did Bob Mueller ask you why you were referencing impeachment?
Congressman, as I just stated, Director Mueller did not ask me about any text message.
We also got more insight from Agent Strzok today about that infamous text from August of 2016 when he and Lisa Page talk about stopping Trump. He said today that that was a reference to a lot of anger he felt after what he described as then candidate Trump's belittling of a Gold Star family. Here's that exchange.
My presumption, based on that horrible, disgusting behavior, that the American population would not elect somebody demonstrating that behavior to be president of the United States.
We'll stop it. You were speaking on behalf of the American people. Is that correct?
I don't recall writing that text.
Are you denying writing the text?
What I can tell you is that text in no way suggested that I or the FBI would take any action to influence the candidacy of
Agent
candidate
Strzok,
Trump.
that is a fantastic answer to a question nobody asked.
Yep.
Agent Strzok was also pressed on another series of texts where he was very disparaging about Trump supporters in Virginia and that key phrase that he could smell the Trump supporters. Here's that exchange.
What does Trump support smell like, Mr. Strzok?
Sir, that's an expression of speech. I clearly wasn't smelling one thing or the other. What I meant by that was living in Northern Virginia, having traveled 100 and 150 miles south within the same state, I was struck by the extraordinary difference in the expression of political opinion and belief amongst the community there.
And you described that as smell in capital letters.
Sir, that was a quick choice of words.
Democrats said today that this was really testimony designed to dirty up and damage the special counsel Russia investigation. And they also made the point that if Agent Strzok had this tremendous anti-Trump bias, why didn't he leak information about this counterintelligence investigation during the campaign when it would hurt candidate Trump most? Here's that exchange.
If you had wanted to harm and interfere with the election of President Trump, you could have leaked information that the investigation was ongoing. But none of that came out.
We also have new information tonight about the FBI lawyer Lisa Page. She was under the threat of contempt earlier this week, and she's now agreed, Brian, to a closed-door deposition. So that's a transcribed interview behind closed doors tomorrow, Brian.
Unbelievable. I don't know how you could possibly get to every question I have for you, Catherine, but basically the overview. Peter Strzok says, yeah, I wrote those things. I'm allowed to write those things.
Right.
I shouldn't have wrote those things, but it didn't affect the investigation. We don't know yet what happened with the Russia investigation, but in terms of the Hillary Clinton investigation, is he right? Is there any proof of bias in the way he went about this?
I think that he made overly broad statements about the findings of the Justice Department Inspector General. The Justice Department Inspector General, in fact, found that when you get to sort of August of 2016, when there's that text message about stopping Trump, that was the point at which the Inspector General said, whoa, like we have changed from expressing an anti-Trump sentiment to talking about taking some kind of action. And he said from sort of there on going forward, you just could not reach the conclusion that actions were taken without political bias, so kind of trying to prove a negative. So Agent Strzok was very generous, if you will, in terms of his interpretation of the Inspector General's findings. And I would also emphasize to folks at home, the Inspector General was not looking at the impact of any political bias on decision-making about the opening of the Russia probe and the early days of that investigation. That is going to come at a later date, Brian.
Yeah, and Catherine, finally, in this investigation, you did not get him to answer the question, what does he mean about stopping Trump? He doesn't remember writing that. Is that acceptable?
Well, there was some conflict in the testimony, Brian, about that specific text. At one point he said, I don't remember writing it, and then he said, I remember writing it late at night and that I was driven by anger. The bottom line with the text messages, and I think this is a big important takeaway, is when you talk to people like I have in law enforcement and intelligence circles, they will tell you that if you're working in counterintelligence, one of the things you do not do is send a lot of text messages, especially text messages about personally compromising information, because that is the kind of information a foreign intelligence service looks for in order to compromise you.
Right.
Agent Strzok was the #2 person at the FBI in this area. He knows that our intelligence services are looking for exactly this kind of information about an extramarital affair to use against someone to bring them onto our team. So in many respects, that was one of the cardinal rules that Agent Strzok broke, and that's really shared by a number of law enforcement and intelligence contacts.
Oh, yeah. He's to blame that we're in this spot and that we had 12 hours of testimony. He wrote those texts. No one asked him to, and he had a very prestigious job that made anyone question the outcome. Catherine Herridge, great job. Thanks so much for setting us up.
You're welcome.
All right, one of the Republican lawmakers there, Louis Gohmert, and things boiled over with him during the hearing. He blasted Strzok for the impact he had on public trust in the FBI and his personal behavior.
The disgrace, what this man has done.
The gentleman from Texas will suspend for a moment.
There is the disgrace. And it won't be recaptured anytime soon because of the damage you've done to the justice system. And I've talked to FBI agents around the country. You've embarrassed them. You've embarrassed yourself. And I can't help but wonder when I see you looking there with a little smirk, how many times did you look so innocent into your wife's eye and lie to her about Lisa?
Mr. Chairman, this is outrageous.
The credibility of a witness is always an issue.
Mr. Chairman, please.
Mr. Chairman, this is intolerable harassment of the witness.
What's wrong with that? You need your medication.
It was a free-for-all, and you heard that comment in, do you need your medication? Congressman Louis Gohmert, did you lose your temper, or did you intend to bring up his personal life decisions?
No, I didn't go into it intending to do that, but as I sat there listening to him so smugly, his little smirk, and he had lied repeatedly, and he knew he was lying, he knew I knew he was lying, and yet he still would lie. And I'm telling you, the unfortunate thing is about that last exchange I had with him, it may have clouded over a very, very important story, and that is that he was told by the intelligence community Inspector General's investigator, Frank Rucker, that they had found an anomaly in the emails going to and from Hillary Clinton's unauthorized private server, and it was when they forensically examined the anomaly, they found embedded information, and it was a foreign entity, not Russia, but a foreign entity that was getting every single one of her over 30,000 emails.
So wait, Congressman, just to stop you there. Just to stop there.
Russia.
So you're saying that in Hillary Clinton's emails, they were forwarded to somebody else?
Yes, and it was because they were hacked, and Horowitz didn't point that out. You know, the previous story, you know, that Comey gave us. Well, it was not a good server. It was possible that it got hacked, but there was no evidence it was hacked. And then we find out, and that's what I brought out today, that the intelligence community IG brought it to their attention, and they did nothing. Nothing. And this is a foreign entity not related to Russia in the least that is getting everyone. There were only 4 of over 30,000 emails they didn't get. They were going to and from. She compromised America's security.
Congressman, one of the many people who questioned Peter Strzok today and will probably question Lisa Page tomorrow at about 1:30 Eastern time. Congressman, thanks so much.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, Democrats took to their turn of questioning to Peter Strzok as well, though obviously they had a very different tone. For example,
you're here and you're not taking the 5th.
That's correct.
Did you consider taking the 5th?
No.
Why not?
I've done nothing wrong.
Well, that was Congressman Eric Swalwell of California. He joins us now after a marathon day that was flat-out riveting television. Congressman, first off, your take. Are you under the belief that Peter Strzok should not have been forced to come in and speak or come in on his own and speak? Did you see any merit to him being there?
Well, good evening, Brian. I just think this was the wrong hearing with kids separated from their families, and this committee has jurisdiction to do something about that. But he was there. He certainly should answer questions about those texts. I didn't like those texts either. I've said before that if he was working for me, he would be gone by now. But I also believe that they never affected any decisions he made, and there were a lot of people making decisions in the investigation, and we should prioritize our time in other directions.
So, Congressman, the Inspector General report on the Russian part of the investigation has not been out, just the Hillary texts. So you have to wonder if someone's going to investigate Brian Kilmeade or Eric Swalwell, I just want to make sure they didn't have agenda against me. And when you have things, and I'll just repeat them, if it said blank Swalwell, blank is Swalwell is a disaster. I could smell the Swalwell supporters. We're going to stop referring to Swalwell's candidacy for president. Just ripping him. And then it turns out that he's doing the investigating. At the very least, don't you feel as though it's contaminated, let alone should be examined?
Yeah, well, I don't believe it's contaminated in the sense that it wasn't valid, but I do think Bob Mueller made the right decision to pull him off the team. I was a prosecutor for 7 years before coming to Congress, and I've dealt with issues in the investigation. And what I would always do if there was a question about what a police officer did is I would try and corroborate the decisions they made and the investigative tactics they used with other outside evidence. And here, he was not the one who set up the Trump Tower meeting. Peter Strzok was not the one who had Donald Trump's lawyer communicate with Felix Sater and try and arrange for Putin and Trump to meet so they could, quote unquote, engineer the election. And Peter Strzok was not the speechwriter when Donald Trump told an audience, Russia, if you're listening, you'll be rewarded if you're able to get Hillary Clinton's emails.
Well, that wasn't a speechwriter. He was. It was a press conference, and if you could argue that if you're saying something like that, you couldn't possibly be guilty of that. But he was do this, and tell me if I'm wrong here, Congressman. He was the one who interviewed Michael Flynn. He was the one that finished off the Hillary Clinton interview. He was the one who got a hold of the Anthony Weiner laptop and somehow mysteriously waited 3 weeks to tell James Comey or Andy McCabe. We still don't have the answers there. He is implicated in somewhat of this dossier. He might have dealt somewhere with David Corn, who wrote Russian Roulette, and others. So there's a lot of questions. He's in the middle of everything. He's like Zelig.
Absolutely. However, I don't want to make him more significant than he is. And on the Michael Flynn case, Michael Flynn pled guilty. He didn't have a gun held to his head by Peter Strzok. You know, he's pled guilty and is now cooperating. And so I also wanted to point out with him, and he said that he was not the sole investigator to close the Hillary Clinton case. He was not the sole investigator to open the Trump Russia investigation. And so, again, I think as the public learns about more of the evidence we saw in the House Intelligence Committee and more of the evidence that Bob Mueller is reviewing, they'll have a lot of confidence in the work that the FBI did to start this investigation and hopefully to close close it soon.
Right, and you were prepared, and you did bring up all those things in your introduction. You did say something else. Right in the beginning, when things got totally out of control and we didn't have enough cameras to cover all 72 of you, you said, hey, wait a second, let's bring Steve Bannon back in, and we need to question him. Could you ground that in where'd that come from?
Sure. Mr. Gowdy was threatening contempt to Mr. Strzok for not answering questions, and that actually set a bell off in my head because I remember Mr. Gowdy asking Mr. Bannon in our House Intelligence investigation questions that Mr. Bannon refused to answer. And Mr. Bannon was under subpoena, but the Republicans on the committee refused to actually hold him in contempt to try and get the answer. So I thought if we're truly interested in getting answers that witnesses refuse to answer, then we should subpoena Mr. Bannon before the committee, just like they're doing to Mr. Strzok. Of course, they voted against that. Interestingly, though, Trey Gowdy did not vote while he was present in the hearing.
I also think beyond a shadow of a doubt in terms of his questions and an insight, and you know we called out the president once and said, Mr. President, if you're innocent, act like it. So I think that he's as good as it gets in terms of preparation as well. But I'm going to bring this up. Lisa Page is coming in Friday, 1:30, we understand. What questions do you have for her that might be different than you would have for Peter Strzok?
Well, again, I think we're putting our priorities in the wrong direction with families still separated, and we're going to spend hours again with Ms. Page. But I would want to just corroborate what I learned from Mr. Strzok, which was that there were many other individuals involved in both closing the Hillary Clinton investigation and opening the Russia investigation, and to make sure that this was not limited to just Mr. Strzok and Ms. Page.
That's a good point. It's just amazing. You have to bring in, everybody has to bring in other people involved to get over the fact that you can't get past the bias that they put in black and white. And if I wrote a script about an investigation, they would hand this back to me and say, it's too deliberate. Give me some nuance. These text messages are so egregious, we almost had to have a day like this eventually. But I understand there's a lot of things going on. Congressman, always appreciate your insight. You're one of the most interesting people to talk to in Washington. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Meanwhile, Congressman Trey Gowdy, also one of the most interesting people in Washington, pressured Strzok repeatedly about his apparent, confirmed bias against Trump during the 2016 election.
You're 8 days into your Russian collusion with the Trump campaign investigation, and you got another text from your colleague, Lisa Page. Trump's not ever going to become president, right? Right? And you replied, no. No, he's not. We'll stop it.
What I can tell you is that text in no way suggested that I or the FBI would take any action to influence the candidacy of
Agent
candidate
Strzok,
Trump.
that is a fantastic answer to a question nobody asked. It was the existence of your bias that got you kicked off.
No, Mr. Gowdy, it wasn't. I do not have bias. It is not my understanding that he kicked me off because of any bias, that it was done based on the appearance. If you want to represent what you said accurately, I'm happy to answer that question, but I don't appreciate what was originally said being changed.
I don't give a damn what you appreciate, Agent Strzok. I don't appreciate having an FBI agent with an unprecedented level of animus working on 2 major investigations during 2016.
Did you pull your foot off the gas for Hillary Clinton, and did you go ahead and screw up the Donald Trump investigation? At the very least, you contaminated it with your text. Joining us now is Terry Turchi. He's a former deputy assistant at the FBI's counterterrorism division. He joined us. First off, I got to ask you, does the FBI look bad today, or does Peter Strzok look bad today?
Well, unfortunately, the FBI looks bad because Peter Strzok looks even worse. I thought we might go into today and maybe we could start rebuilding and regaining the trust of the American public as a result of this hearing. It actually got worse. I mean, you see very clearly not just the bias that he took into this case, but what really hurts, and something I never saw in 30 years in the FBI, and that is kind of this disdain and contempt for what I think is the American public in general. I've never seen that in the FBI. I mean, FBI agents, FBI employees usually can get along and be out there and be around everybody. But when you start calling people deplorable and you go into Walmarts and you text messages that people smelled, I mean, he didn't explain any of that. You just can't be that way and be in the FBI. And remember, he's not just any FBI agent. I mean, I know the Democrats on the committee want to make sure people think that, but he's the Deputy Assistant Director, or was, of the Counterintelligence Division. He had major say in the decisions in the course of these cases. And in fact, he had a major say in everybody working for him and the morale of people and in their own attitudes. You cannot lead and have this attitude, and he can't tell me that he withheld the way he feels about all these things from everybody that worked for him and around him. I just don't buy that.
Terry, what about this? Bob Mueller, head of the FBI for years, gets rid of Peter Strzok, but never told him what the reason was. He ends up at Human Resources, from the fourth most powerful person of the FBI to Human Resources, and he's not even curious why.
One of the problems, Brian, in Washington, D.C., and it's not just in this case, nobody really at a certain level communicates with anyone. So I can buy off on that Mueller might have said, you know, It's been nice knowing you, but you're going to leave. But in fact, never really got into any detail. I can really see that happening because that's the way they talk there. And that's one of the reasons we're sitting here today. People at a certain level, like James Comey, Andrew McCabe, don't feel that they need to talk and communicate with people about some of the reasons for their actions.
Terry, thanks so much. A sad day for the FBI, especially with the smugness of Peter Strzok. That's the way it came off to me. Thanks so much. Welcome. Meanwhile, our coverage of this marathon Peter Strzok congressional hearings continues. We got more insight. Kim Strassel on deck. Don't move.
Tucker Carlson.
For some reason, Democrats were eager to show support for Peter Strzok during today's hearing. Congressman Steve Cohen compared Strzok to American soldiers killed or wounded in the line of duty, saying he, Peter Strzok, deserved a Purple Heart for his efforts answering questions. And at one point, when Strzok went on an extended justification of himself and his actions, committee Democrats actually burst out into applause. Listen.
It was in no way, unequivocally, any suggestion that me, the FBI, would take any action whatsoever to improperly impact the electoral process. And the proposition that that is going on, that it might occur anywhere in the FBI, deeply corrodes what the FBI is in American society, the effectiveness of their mission, and it is deeply destructive.
Mr. Chairman, I have a motion.
Where does the applause come from? Why is he worthy of applause after what we already know about his actions? Kim Strassel joins us now from the Wall Street Journal editorial board. She joined us. By the way, you got voicemail if you called Kim today, because she watched like I did all day and were riveted by it. Was his comments after Trey Gowdy's questions worthy of applause in the Strassel household?
Of course not. I mean, look, there has been deep destruction of the FBI, but much of it has come from the text messages that have been exposed and shown that we have FBI agents that exhibit this degree of animus while working on presidential campaign investigations.
So you have him going through this, saying there's no bias there. You know what one of his reasons for saying no, the investigation wasn't contaminated? There are other people below and above him that would have checked him had he tried anything. So there were people below to overcome his bias. And by the way, if you think there's no plan, what about the insurance plan reference never explained? What about we'll stop him, won't we? Yes, we will. Stop him from what? He doesn't even remember writing that.
Brian, this was an incredibly disingenuous answer that he gave about the checks above and below. First of all, we know from Jim Comey that he wasn't involved, and many in the leadership were not involved with the day-to-day investigation decisions here. That's why Peter Strzok was the lead investigator. And on any given day, at any given moment, he would have been and could have been and was making independent decisions that influenced the course of this investigation. So obviously, he had the ability to take action that wouldn't have been questioned and might have been motivated by bias, most likely were.
James Comey was basically the king in this. He didn't do any of the work. He just took the copy. He was the one with his sleeves rolled up doing the investigating for Hillary Clinton, for Michael Flynn, for doing the investigation on the Russia side, the Anthony Weiner laptop decision to push it forward. Now, Kim, you wanted me to bring you to Jim Jordan's questioning of Peter Strzok. He was relentless in pushing to find out about his role with the dossier and what Bruce Orr's role was doing. And he, of course, with the FBI, whose wife worked for the group that got the dossier to begin with. So let's listen to this exchange, and I'll get you to comment.
Are there 3 copies of the dossier as evidenced by what you said in this email? The McCain copy, the BuzzFeed copy, and the one that you got from Corn and Simpson.
The most I can say is we received a variety of copies of and different types of
Let me ask you
reports.
one other question. When Agent Strzok won't answer fundamental questions like the guy he references in an email, Corn and Simpson, and won't tell me who they are, this is unbelievable.
David Corn, Mother Jones, who co-wrote Russian Roulette. And then you have Simpson from Fusion GPS, who commissioned Steele to go ahead and do this research. How significant is it that those names turn out in an FBI counterintelligence investigator's email?
Yeah, it's very important. And, you know, by the way, if anyone deserves a medal today, it was Jim Jordan for relentlessly pursuing this. So much so, look, the FBI was advising Mr. Strzok not to answer any questions, but Jordan was hitting this so hard that even the counsel backed down in the end and did give Strzok permission to provide some very modest information. What he did give was important, which is that we now have some questions about how many versions of this dossier were actually out there. Did he have a copy that was different than the ones that was released to the press? Did he have his own method of communication with Fusion GPS because he was using these people's names in the email? But more importantly, we found out that Bruce Orr, who was a Department of Justice official, married to Nellie Orr, who worked for Fusion GPS, was indeed serving as a conduit between that opposition research firm and the FBI, passing along information from the group that had been hired by the Hillary Clinton campaign.
Which he never admitted that he knew. He didn't even say, I don't know if it was a DNC thing. I don't know if Hillary Clinton paid for it. What do you mean you didn't know? Comey had the same answer. That is terrible investigative if you don't know where your intelligence is coming from. Kim, you writing tomorrow?
Yep, I am. Not on this, but read it anyway. It's on taxes.
All right, good. I'm against them. So we'll see where you stand on that. Kimberly Strassel, thanks so much. Appreciate it. She writes for the Wall Street Journal, which I get for free. We'll have even more on the Peter Strzok Capitol Hill showdown right after the break. We have to wrap up 12 hours of testimony. Only the Tucker Carlson show can do it. At least keep your fingers crossed. I think they can. With Advil, Democrats clashing on Capitol Hill today in the nth degree as they grilled FBI agent Peter Strzok. And when they weren't yelling at Strzok, the lawmakers were actually yelling at each other over the rules. For example,
Parliamentary inquiry, what rules are we following that would dictate such an answer by you, Mr. Chairman?
We are following the rules of the committee.
Could you cite the rule?
No.
The Democratic members have a right
recognized.
to know what the rules are in governing this hearing.
Gentlemen,
can you share with us
the gentleman
rules
is not
that you're
in order.
making up as you go along?
It's going to be tough for me to get through it if I keep getting interrupted.
Yeah, every time he got on a roll, some Democrat would scream something out. Congressman Steve Russell is a Republican representing Oklahoma. He's used to more discipline because he's got such a rich military background. And you did keep your composure. And Congressman, thanks for joining us. In particular, you focused on the code of conduct. And you zeroed in on the fact that you have a phone that belongs to the government, and you're texting Lisa Page about presidential candidates. Hillary Clinton's going to get elected. Donald Trump's the worst thing in the world. The people that vote for him smell and are ignorant. So this is going back and forth. Did he try to actually say that that was within the code of conduct for the FBI?
He did. He repeatedly claimed that he violated nothing according to the policies. That's why I cited all of the policies back to him that showed that he was in clear violation over multiple levels, and his own personal moral conduct, which was laid out in the IG report.
He also said the IG report showed no bias. I regret doing those text messages, but it didn't affect my investigation.
Yeah, and that's not the case at all. In fact, Inspector Horowitz, with regard to Strzok himself, said that he had a clear bias mindset. He also stated in the case of the Wiener laptop that they had no confidence that he did not have bias in delaying the decision to reveal the laptop. So they said he had bias in decision making. We heard repeatedly today the opposite from the other side of the aisle and from the witness himself under oath. It was not the case.
It was not the case. So do you take your foot off the gas for the Hillary Clinton investigation? By the way, he's there interrogating Hillary Clinton on that 4th of July weekend in that summer. And he's also there for Michael Flynn. And there were reports that they did not believe Michael Flynn was lying, yet they bled him dry financially, and he had no choice but to somehow cut a deal. That's my opinion, and basically it's turning into fact. And then he's there when he finds the Anthony Weiner laptop, an FBI bureau does, and they see all these emails forwarded from Ruba Abedin, originally from Hillary Clinton. His decision to delay telling Comey could have done more damage than Hillary Clinton, ironically, than anything else. Correct?
Well, in fact, this is one of the things that Inspector Horowitz in the IG report hones in on, that they did think that the delay clearly showed a bias. And then when we see the text messages and his own personal conduct, he was biased and he was in violation, despite his assertions today.
Steve, in your past, you focused on the so-called informants, or as President Trump says, spies, like the Cambridge professor. They want to try to bring out Carter Page and Papadopoulos. Do you going to pursue that avenue to find out how many other people were victims, perhaps, of informants working for the FBI as contractors?
Well, one of the things that we want to get to along those lines is if we get the chance to talk to Lisa Page. These are the types of things that we would like to know more about. So this thing is not done. And, they talk about, this thing's gone on too long and it's why are we doing this? I'll tell you why. Because our law enforcement agencies have to be trusted by the American people. And if we can't trust them, then we lose our institutions. It doesn't matter how long it takes. Abraham Lincoln said nothing good can be frustrated by time. We have to get to the bottom of it.
And Congressman, I just don't want anyone to investigate me with something like prison on the line or my presidency if they hate my guts. And these people hated the president in every way, shape, or form. Congressman Russell, thanks so much.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, straight ahead. While today's Capitol Hill drama was unfolding, new messages between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page were released. What did they reveal? We'll tell you next.
OMG, he's an idiot. Hi, how was Trump other than a douche? Melania? Trump is a disaster. I have no idea how destabilizing his presidency would be. No, he's not. We'll stop it. I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, that there's no way he gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40. I can't pull away. What the F happened to our country, Lise?
That was Peter Strzok testifying on Capitol Hill today. He occasionally had a clear memory, especially when he was asked to read his text out loud by Darrell Issa. But at other times, it was surprising how fuzzy his memory was, like when he was asked about softening an FBI statement to benefit Hillary Clinton.
Metadata shows that you modified the draft statement on June 6th. Is this when the phrase grossly negligent was changed to extremely careless?
Sir, again, I don't recall specifically when it happened.
Was it your computer that put the change in to the statement?
Based on my subsequent review of that metadata, I believe that to be true.
Okay, and who has access to your computer? Anybody beside you?
No, I do. My secretary had access to elements of it.
Nailed. While this was happening on Capitol Hill today, additional emails between Strzok and Lisa Page were released. To discuss that, Judicial Watch's own President Tom Fitton, who made it happen with his FOIA request. Tom, first off, your take of what we saw today.
Well, it was a bit of a circus, and it ought to be only the beginning, frankly, in terms of getting information out of the Justice Department and FBI. I don't understand why the Mueller operation is still going on, given the corruption evidence in these texts that Strzok admitted to. We're not talking about bias here. We're talking about corruption. This is evidence of corruption. An FBI agent, a senior FBI official, wanting to direct an investigation a certain way to target a political opponent. And on top of that, we have Mr. Mueller seemingly disinterested in this corruption. He kept it from the American people for months, he and the Justice Department, that he had to remove Strzok because of this corruption. And if I were Congress, I'd call him in and ask him some questions about how he's managing his investigation and the evidence of bias and corruption with his team. That is still undermining the credibility of the entire Justice Department and FBI he's using to target Trump.
I understand you got some emails and text messages today. What do they say?
Well, they show communications between Page and Strzok. First of all, we had to sue to get the records. The Justice Department and FBI want to take up to 2 years to turn them over to us, so they're giving them to us in dribs and drabs, and they're from 2015. They show the relationship between Page and Strzok was quite close in 2015. And he's cursing everyone out. He's cursing decisions about the FBI. They're making fun of colleagues. And they show that Mr. Strzok was quite truthful, in my view, in the way he communicated with Lisa Page about how he was analyzing what the FBI was doing. One of the big lies we heard today was that this was all personal. Look, Ryan, we wouldn't be getting these text messages and the emails if they were personal by law. The reason we're seeing them is because they're government emails about government activity.
Right.
Anyone who says it's personal political beliefs, if that were the case, we wouldn't be seeing them.
40,000 already we know about. You say we got more. You're still going through them. Real quick, he also went out of it. He also went out of his way in his personal message to try to explain away his behavior. Did he do it effectively to you?
No, he didn't. Look, your listeners, the viewers, are just going to have to decide whether they take his word that the bias didn't impact the investigations. The IG didn't believe it. Mr. Mueller didn't believe it. Why should anyone else believe it? And the facts are what they are. He tried to spin them, and we have to decide as adults what to do with this evidence. Should we allow the corrupted Mueller investigation to continue, given his involvement and the involvement of several other FBI officials who thought like him in directing it and creating it?
Tom, congratulations. Continue to go through all that stuff. You are relentless, as his Judicial Watch is, to get to the truth. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Meanwhile, far away from today's hearing, President Trump's European trip is continuing. We will discuss what to expect from the president's visit to the UK, and then he goes to this place called Helsinki, Finland, to meet with Vladimir Putin. Besides that, really not much to do on this trip. Glad you're watching. This week's NATO summit in Brussels, contentious, but just like last month's G7 summit, no big difference. But it appears to have ended well for President Trump and the whole NATO organization. This morning, for us, the president vowed that his tone on NATO would not change once he left the summit, for example.
Will you be tweeting differently once you board the Air Force One? Thank you.
No, that's other people that do that. I don't. I'm very consistent. I'm a very stable genius.
Right. The president, that is awesome. The president is now in England for a working visit. He's already met with Prime Minister Theresa May for a gala dinner. Dr. Alan Mendoza is executive director of the Henry Jackson Society and joins us right now. A lot to report, Doctor. First off, the president said through Sarah Sanders, the president says, I like and respect Theresa May. She was very good to me during NATO. Thanks for all our hospitality. He's going to be in Scotland soon and then on to with Vladimir Putin. How do you feel about how this visit's gone?
Well, so far, I think it's been a typically interesting trip by the president. He's arrived on the back of a huge success at NATO, where he's moved the needle on defence expenditure, but come out also, very importantly, saying how he personally believes that the alliance is an important one. So that's a positive. He's arrived in the UK. He's made some comments about Brexit, which is his usual way of stirring things up. But then he's gone to a very serious gala dinner where he's met our business leaders, and we've begun discussions on how we can forge a trade agreement between the two countries. So it started, I think, in a typically whirlwind style, and I expect it to continue in that as well.
So The Sun has a story of an interview with the president, and the headlines is, Trump's Brexit blast. I told May how to do Brexit, but she wrecked it. The U.S. trade deal with Britain is off if she doesn't basically get it right and leave the EU. What's the ramifications of that statement?
Well, I think it's important to firstly note that what the president said was that on his sort of understanding at this moment in time, it looked like it was going to be an EU deal, and therefore, if that was the case, the US wouldn't be able to do a trade deal. Now, I suspect that as the visit continues, we may get, as with the NATO summit, a very different statement at the end or slightly afterwards, suggesting that he might have been, kind of convinced that it is possible to do a trade deal. So let's start from that point. However, it's a very real and very significant political development that he's put in writing, essentially, that he thinks at present this deal is not going to make sense for Britain and indeed for the US. So that is a significant political blow for the Prime Minister, and we can't diminish that.
Right, and then we have Vladimir Putin next, and NATO was kind of worried, some members of NATO, that the president might decide to call off military exercises or pledge something similar to North Korea. I don't think there's a reason to worry about something like that. There's not much on the agenda. Do you think this will be a positive meeting?
Well, I think it's certainly going to be, again, an interesting meeting. Here you have the two leaders meeting essentially one-on-one for the first time, or with close advisors, depending on how it ends up going. I think you're right to suggest that there won't be major agreements made or sort of surprises coming out of it. So I think it's really a question of how they get on, and indeed if there is a possibility of getting to a place where they can both come to agreement going down the line.
It's unbelievable. Now you guys have the Trump machine and the tornado. You're in the middle of all that news that we get on a regular basis. Alan Mendoza, thanks so much. Appreciate it.